Let me start with a contradiction nobody can ignore. The White House keeps saying Iran has been badly weakened. Its missile arsenal has been reduced. Its manufacturing capacity has been hit. Its roads, military infrastructure, and command systems have been damaged. Trump himself said Iran has far fewer missiles than it had 4 or 5 months ago. But now, according to new reporting, Trump has reportedly ordered preparations for a fresh attack on Tehran, and the White House did not deny it. That is the real story. Because if Iran has already been decimated, why does Washington need another strike on the capital? That question tells us this war is not close to ending. It tells us the United States may have damaged Iran, but it has not forced Iran to surrender. It tells us that military strikes may have reduced Iran's capabilities, but they have not removed the threat. And that threat is now changing shape. This is no longer just about missiles. The State Department has now posted a $50 million reward for information about Iran's military drone program. That detail matters. It means Washington is looking beyond the missile sites it has already bombed. It is now hunting the systems Iran can still use to keep fighting cheaply, quietly, and repeatedly. Drones are harder to stop than press conferences make them sound. They can be launched in waves. They can be moved around. They can pressure bases, ships, oil facilities, and allies. And they can keep a war alive even after larger weapon systems are damaged. So when Trump says Iran has some missiles left, that one word matters. Some, not none. And in the Middle East, some can still be enough. Some missiles can still hit a Gulf base. Some drones can still threaten American forces. Some proxy groups can still attack Kurdistan or Iraq. Some strikes can still move oil markets. Some surviving capability can still stop Washington from declaring a clean victory. That is why this possible new attack on Tehran is so important. It suggests the United States may be moving from retaliation into coercion. Not just hitting Iran because Iran attacked first, but hitting Iran until it comes back to the table in what the White House calls a meaningful way. That phrase sounds diplomatic, but underneath it is a threat. Iran will keep paying until it negotiates the way Washington wants. And the pressure is not only military. The Treasury is talking about Iran's economy, claiming the central bank has been forced to print money, pushing inflation to extreme levels. The administration is also talking about seizing Iranian assets around the world and directing that money toward the Iranian people. So look at the strategy. Bomb the military, expose the drone program, crush the economy, target assets abroad, pressure proxies in the region, and force Tehran back into talks. That is not one policy. That is a full-spectrum pressure campaign. But here is where the danger begins. At the same time Washington is increasing pressure on Iran, the United States is also nearing a withdrawal from Iraq by the end of September. And as that withdrawal moves forward, Iran and its proxy groups are reportedly increasing attacks on the Kurdistan region. That creates a dangerous contradiction. America is reducing its ground footprint while the regional war is expanding. So who fills the space when American forces leave? Who protects Kurdistan if Iranian-backed groups escalate? Who controls the pressure on Iraq? And what happens if Tehran decides that America is strong from the air, but weaker on the ground? That is the deeper problem. The United States can bomb Tehran, but can it control what happens in Iraq, Kurdistan, the Gulf, Hormuz, and the wider region after the bombs fall? That is the question this video is about, because every war has two stories. The first story is the strike, the explosions, the targets, the official statements, the strong language. The second story is what comes after, the surviving missiles, the drones, the proxies, the economy, the withdrawal timelines, the unanswered questions. And right now, that second story is where the real danger lives. So today we need to ask the question Washington may not want to answer. Is Trump preparing a final blow to force Iran back to the table? Or is America entering a war with no clean exit, where every strike proves Iran is weaker, but every next strike proves Iran is still not broken? A new strike on Tehran would not be just another military update. It would be a confession. Because if Washington is preparing another attack on Iran's capital, after months of saying Iran's arsenal has been shattered, then the real message is not that Iran has been finished. The real message is that Iran is still standing. That is the contradiction at the center of this story. Trump says Iran has far fewer missiles than it had 4 or 5 months ago. He says its manufacturing capacity is almost gone. He says its road capacity and military infrastructure have been badly damaged. But then, almost in the same breath, he admits the part that matters most. They have some left. And in this war, some is enough to keep the crisis alive. Iran does not need a perfect arsenal to remain dangerous. It does not need the same number of missiles it had before the opening strike. It does not need to match American firepower. It only needs enough surviving capability to keep threatening U.S. forces, Gulf bases, shipping routes, Israeli targets, and regional allies. That is why the possible new attack on Tehran is so important. It suggests Washington is no longer satisfied with saying Iran is weakened. It wants Iran to behave weakened. It wants Tehran to come back to the table, accept American terms, and stop using its remaining military and regional tools as leverage. But Iran has not done that. And that is why the White House language is becoming sharper. When the press secretary says Iran will continue to pay until it comes to the table in a meaningful way, that sounds like diplomacy. But underneath it is coercion. It means Washington is trying to create so much military, economic, and political pressure that Iran decides the cost of resistance is higher than the cost of negotiation. That is the theory. Hit Iran's military, track its drone program, squeeze its economy, threaten its leadership, target its regional networks, and force it into talks from a weaker position. But there is a problem with that theory. Iran may be weaker, but weakness does not always produce surrender. Sometimes weakness produces defiance, especially when the regime believes that giving in would make it look broken, invite internal pressure, and encourage the next strike. From Tehran's point of view, returning to talks too quickly after being bombed could look like humiliation. And in a system built around resistance, humiliation is politically dangerous. That is why Iran may choose to absorb punishment rather than fold immediately. It can say to its own population, yes, we were hit, but we did not surrender. It can say to the region, yes, America has air power, but we still have missiles, drones, and proxies. It can say to Washington, you can strike us, but you cannot dictate the ending. That is the logic Trump is trying to break. And that brings us to the drone program. The State Department's new offer of $50 million for information about Iran's military drone network is not a side detail. It may be one of the clearest signs of what Washington is really worried about. Missiles are dramatic. They make headlines. They are easy to show on maps and graphics. But drones are the weapon that can keep pressure alive at lower cost. A drone can be cheaper, smaller, easier to move, easier to hide, and easier to launch in waves. It can threaten bases, ships, oil infrastructure, radar systems, and air defenses. It can be used directly by Iran or indirectly through aligned groups. And because drones can be dispersed, the United States cannot simply destroy one large site and declare the threat finished. That is why a reward for drone information matters. It tells us Washington is looking for the hidden network behind the visible war. Where are the drones built? Where are the components stored? Who moves them? Which units launch them? Which proxy groups receive them? Which routes connect Iran to Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and the Gulf? This is not just a bombing campaign anymore. It is an intelligence war. And that is often the hardest kind to finish. Because you can bomb a building you can see. But a drone network is not always one building. It can be workshops, warehouses, tunnels, roads, front companies, smugglers, engineers, commanders, and allied militias spread across several countries. That is why Iran's remaining capability matters so much. Trump can say the missile arsenal has been heavily reduced, but the United States is still offering tens of millions of dollars for drone intelligence. That means Washington knows Iran's threat is not limited to the weapons already destroyed. The threat has layers. Missiles are one layer, drones are another, proxy groups are another, economic pressure through Hormuz is another, political influence in Iraq is another. And every layer gives Iran a way to keep the war from ending on America's terms. This is where Iraq becomes important. The report says the U.S. withdrawal from Iraq is nearing completion, with all U.S. forces expected to leave by the end of September. At the same time, the autonomous Kurdistan region is facing increasing attacks by Iran and Iran-backed groups. That timing is dangerous, because if America is pulling its forces out of Iraq, while Iran and its networks are increasing pressure there, then Tehran may see an opening. From Iran's point of view, the U.S. may be strong from the air, but its ground presence in the region is shrinking. That creates a different kind of opportunity. Iran does not have to defeat America directly. It can pressure the spaces America leaves behind. Kurdistan becomes one of those spaces. Iraq becomes one of those spaces. American-aligned groups become exposed. And the question becomes, what happens after the US strikes Tehran, but leaves fewer forces on the ground to shape the aftermath? That is the problem with air power. Air power can punish, it can destroy, it can shock, but it cannot govern the consequences. If Iran responds through militias in Iraq, who contains them? If Kurdistan comes under heavier pressure, who protects it? If US forces are leaving, who fills the gap? If Iran decides to fight through proxies instead of direct confrontation, does another strike on Tehran solve that problem or deepen it? This is why the war has no clean exit. Washington is trying to force a decision from Tehran. But Tehran has multiple ways to avoid giving Washington the clean answer it wants. It can negotiate slowly. It can retaliate indirectly. It can preserve drones. It can use proxies. It can threaten Gulf shipping. It can absorb strikes and wait for American patience to weaken. And that is exactly why Trump may be preparing another attack. Not because Iran is untouched, but because Iran is damaged and still resisting. That is often the most dangerous phase of a war. A strong enemy can be deterred because it has something to lose. A fully defeated enemy cannot continue. But a wounded enemy with enough weapons left can be unpredictable. It may decide that if it cannot win cleanly, it can still make victory too expensive for the other side. That is where Iran is trying to place America. You can hit us, but can you stop our drones? Can you stop our proxies? Can you keep Hormuz calm? Can you protect Kurdistan? Can you control Iraq after you leave? Can you force talks without creating another round of resistance? That is the real test. So when Washington talks about another strike on Tehran, do not only look at the target, look at the reason the target is still necessary. The need for another strike means the last strikes did not produce the political result Washington wanted. Iran is weaker, but not obedient. Iran is damaged, but not silent. Iran has fewer missiles, but not zero. Iran's drone network is still important enough for a $50 million reward. And its regional pressure system is still alive enough to worry Iraq, Kurdistan, the Gulf, and Washington at the same time. That is why this war is entering a more dangerous stage. The United States is no longer just trying to hit Iran. It is trying to force Iran into a decision. But Iran may choose not to make that decision at all. It may choose the one strategy weaker powers often use against stronger ones: survive, stretch the conflict, shift the battlefield, and make the stronger power pay for every inch of pressure. And if that is Iran's strategy, then another strike on Tehran may not be the final blow. It may be the beginning of the next, harder phase. Now widen the lens beyond Tehran, because the biggest mistake in this war would be to think the next strike is only about Iran's capital. It is not. A strike on Tehran may be the headline, but the real battlefield is much larger. It runs through drone networks, Iraqi militias, Kurdish territory, Gulf shipping routes, frozen money, inflation, oil prices, and the question Washington still has not answered clearly. What does victory actually look like? That is the missing piece. If victory means damaging Iran, America has already done that. If victory means reducing Iran's missile stockpile, Trump says that has already happened. If victory means hitting manufacturing capacity, the administration says Iran's ability to build and move weapons has been badly degraded. But if victory means forcing Iran to surrender its strategy, stop using drones, stop pressuring US allies, stop threatening shipping, stop working through proxies, and come back to the table on Washington's terms, then the war is clearly not over. Because Iran still has options. And those options are exactly why the White House is increasing pressure again. The United States is not only trying to destroy weapons, it is trying to destroy confidence. It wants Tehran to believe that every week of resistance will become more expensive than the last. Every refusal to negotiate will bring another strike. Every proxy attack will trigger another response. Every drone network will be hunted. Every financial channel will be squeezed. This is no longer just a military campaign, it is a pressure system. Military pressure from the air, economic pressure through sanctions and assets, intelligence pressure through rewards and informants, regional pressure through allies and bases, political pressure through public threats. Washington is trying to make Iran feel surrounded, but that kind of pressure has a risk, because when a regime feels surrounded, it does not always collapse. Sometimes it digs in. And Iran has spent decades building a system designed for exactly this kind of pressure. It has built militias because it expected direct military weakness. It has built drones because it expected air superiority to belong to America and Israel. It has built missile tunnels, hidden depots, and regional networks because it expected its main bases to be targeted. So when Washington hits Iran from the air, Iran does not only answer from Iran, it can answer from Iraq, it can answer through militias, it can answer through drones, it can answer around Hormuz, it can answer by pressuring the Gulf, it can answer by making America protect every exposed point at once. That is the advantage of a network strategy. It does not need one battlefield, it creates many. And this is where the Iraq withdrawal becomes a serious strategic problem. If US forces are nearing withdrawal from Iraq by the end of September, that may sound like America is reducing its exposure, but to Iran and its aligned groups, it may also look like space opening up. The Kurdish region is already facing pressure from Iran and proxy groups. That matters because Kurdistan has often been one of the places where American influence remains stronger than in other parts of Iraq. If that region comes under more attack while US forces are leaving, then the message to every American partner becomes uncomfortable. America can strike from far away, but can it stay long enough to protect you? That is the question allies always ask in wars like this. Not can America bomb? Everyone knows America can bomb. The real question is, can America shape the aftermath? Because a strike is temporary, the aftermath is permanent. If Tehran is hit again, the buildings may burn for a night, but the regional consequences may last for years. Militias may escalate. Iraq may become more unstable. Kurdistan may become more exposed. Gulf states may demand more protection. Oil routes may face new threats. And Iran may decide that if Washington is trying to force surrender, then the only answer is to make the entire region harder to manage. That is how wars expand without anyone announcing a new war. They expand through reaction. A strike in Tehran becomes a drone attack in Iraq. A drone attack in Iraq becomes a US response. A US response becomes pressure on a proxy group. A proxy group targets Kurdistan. Iran denies direct control. Washington blames Tehran. The next strike becomes easier to justify. And step by step, the conflict becomes wider than the original decision. This is why the $50 million reward for information on Iran's drone program is so important. It shows that Washington understands the visible battlefield is not enough. The United States is trying to reach inside the hidden architecture of Iranian power. Drones are not just weapons. They are a system. Designers, engineers, smugglers, workshops, storage sites, front companies, launch teams, software, routes, and proxy handlers. If America can map that system, it can target it. If it cannot map that system, then Iran can keep regenerating the threat. That is the difference between destroying a weapon and destroying a capability. A weapon can be replaced. A capability is harder to rebuild. That is what Washington is really hunting. But the more America attacks Iran's capability, the more Iran may feel the war is not about deterrence anymore. It may feel the war is about stripping the regime of its ability to survive future pressure. And that is the conflict becomes dangerous. Because if Iran believes its missile and drone capacity is being dismantled before a larger confrontation, it may decide to use those systems now rather than lose them later. That is a classic escalation trap. America strikes to reduce future attacks. Iran retaliates before its remaining tools disappear. America sees the retaliation as proof that the strikes were necessary. Iran sees the next strikes as proof that America wanted escalation all along. And the cycle tightens. Now add the economic layer. The Treasury is claiming Iran's economy is under extreme pressure, with inflation, money printing, and assets being targeted around the world. That matters because economic pressure is designed to do what bombs alone may not do: weaken the regime's ability to pay, govern, reward loyalists, and sustain foreign networks. But economic collapse is not a clean tool. It does not only hurt leaders, it hurts ordinary people. It increases desperation. It gives the regime propaganda. It can push more people into anger, but not always in the direction Washington wants. Sometimes economic pain turns people against the government. Sometimes it turns them against the outside power they believe is starving them. That is the gamble. Washington wants the Iranian people to see the regime as the reason for their suffering. Tehran wants the Iranian people to see America as the source of the pressure. And whichever story becomes stronger inside Iran, will shape the next phase of the war. That is why another strike on Tehran is so symbolic. It is not just about military targets. It is about the capital. It is about the image of power. It is about whether the regime can still show control after being hit again. If Tehran absorbs another attack and still refuses to bend, Iran will claim resilience. If the strike causes major damage and forces concessions, Trump will claim strength. But if the strike lands and nothing politically changes, Washington faces an even harder question. How many times can you hit the same enemy before the world starts asking why the enemy is still standing? That is the problem with escalation. Every new strike raises expectations. If America hits lightly, critics say it was not enough. If America hits heavily, the world asks what comes next. And if Iran still does not surrender, the pressure grows for something even bigger. This is how limited wars become open-ended wars. Not because leaders admit they want endless conflict, but because each step fails to produce the final result, so the next step becomes necessary. That is why this moment matters. A fresh attack on Tehran may be presented as strength, but it may also reveal the weakness of the current strategy. America can punish Iran repeatedly, but it still has not found a way to force a clean ending. Iran is not winning in the traditional sense. Its military has been hit, its economy is under pressure, its leadership is under threat, its networks are being hunted. But Iran is surviving, and survival is enough if the enemy's goal is submission. That is the brutal reality. A weaker power does not need to defeat a superpower to deny it victory. It only needs to prevent the superpower from getting the political outcome it promised. So when you hear that Trump may be preparing another strike on Tehran, do not only ask what targets will be hit. Ask what result Washington expects afterward. Will Iran come to the table? Will its drones stop? Will its proxies stand down? Will Kurdistan be safer? Will Iraq be more stable? Will Hormuz calm down? Will the Iranian economy break in the way Washington wants? Or will this simply create the next round of retaliation? Because if the answer is unclear, then the strike is not an ending. It is another chapter. And that may be the real warning inside this story. The United States is trying to force Iran into meaningful negotiations by making resistance too painful. But Iran is trying to prove that no amount of pain will give Washington a clean victory. That is the contest now. Not just missiles versus missiles, willpower versus pressure, air power versus networks, sanctions versus survival. A superpower trying to impose an ending, and a wounded regime trying to make that ending impossible. So before you go, tell me in the comments, is Trump's next strike on Tehran the final pressure needed to force Iran back to the table? Or is America entering a war where every new strike proves the last one was not enough?